This meeting is now being recorded.
It is 1 o'clock, and we want to get our Laboratory Accreditation Standards webinar started. I'm Christine Sotelo. I'm the Chief of California ELAP, and I just want to remind everybody to please put your phones on mute, and don't put it on mute if you know you have music, because we heard a little bit of music earlier, so figure that out. The other thing I wanted to mention is that this webinar is being recorded, and if you have any comments after we close this webinar, please feel free to email elapcalifornia@waterboards.ca.gov. Okay, so let's get started here. So, in order for us to have a productive conversation, I wanted to give you all just some background on this presentation and where we're headed. You all know that the expert review panel report was released last year in October, and in that report of ELAP's program, they gave us 5 recommendations. One of the recommendations was to adopt a new lab accreditation standard, and we agreed with that recommendation. And presently, we are working with our Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, also known as LTAC, to evaluate the options. So, what's the goal for this webinar? So our goal is to communicate the direction we are headed. We also want to empower you to communicate with your LTAC representative, because LTAC is going to play a major role in the final decision. And we want to ensure, as a program, that we are considering all the options for the lab accreditation standard. I want to make sure everyone knows during this webinar that we're not making any decisions today, and that's not a goal. It, again, is to communicate and to empower you and ensure that we are considering all the options. So I want us to leave this meeting today where we have everything to consider about lab standards. So up until now, a lot of the lab community has been framing this issue of lab standards around T&I versus not T&I. Can you put your phone on mute? Hello? Thank you. So, as I said, up until now, you know, the framework is that, is it T&I or is it not T&I? But ELAP doesn't see it that way. We see this in a form of several decisions have to make where California will go for a sustainable and effective accreditation program. So today is just about education, letting you all know what we've discovered about the range of options available to us. And it's formed around these decisions. 1, should we update our technical standards? And we have a sub-decision is, if yes, what should we use? Decision 2, should we add a quality management system? And there are sub-questions to that. If yes, which one? And then what are the options for implementation? And then the final decision is, how frequently do we require proficiency testing? So this presentation is framed around those decisions that we have to make. So the structure for this presentation is this. We're going to tell you what other states do. We're going to use the research to create a list of available options to ELAP. And then we're going to go through what we see as the pros and cons of all the options. And we're going to do this separately for each of the decisions. And we're going to allocate 30 minutes for discussion at the end of each decision. And then there should be an extra half hour at the end to discuss the entire presentation. We want this to be an interactive webinar, so it allows for good discussion on all the options and the decisions that we are considering. So, decision 1, should we update our laboratory's technical standards? And if yes, what should we use? So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go through the research after each decision. So 21 states in the United States use the US EPA Drinking Water Certification Manual. That's the federal regulation for drinking water. 2 of those states use the international standard, ISO. It's a nationally and international conformity assessment testing standard. It's used in pharmaceutical labs, testing and calibration labs, but 2 states use that. The ELAP 2003 standard, it's a consensus-based standard developed over many years, and it has input from laboratory and regulatory professionals, federal, state, and local levels. There are 2 states that use that. And then the next iteration of ELAP is P&I. It has many technical advances, and it was also developed through consensus. It's a newer version of the ELAP 2003 standard. So there's 13 states, and 11 states created their own. And here are some slides that summarize each of the states that use each of these standards. The US EPA Drinking Water Manual, ISO 17025, we have 2. ELAP 2003, Florida and New York. 2009 P&I, here are the states. And then the 11 states that created their own standards. Wyoming doesn't have any labs, so they don't have a program. And then I wanted to give you more detail on some of the state-created standards. So, of the 11, 8 of those states slightly deviate from the EPA Drinking Water Cert Manual. 1 state, which is Kentucky, used EPA's manual, ISO 17025 and 40 CFR Part 136 to create their standard. And then Wisconsin, you heard about them during the ERP process. They use P&I's technical requirements as the framework. And then Arizona took a totally different approach. So, based on our research, what options does ELAP have for our technical standards? So, here they are. This is the universe that we're looking at for technical standards. For US EPA's Drinking Water Manual, well, what do we see as the pros? Well, everybody's already using it. It's a federally established minimum requirement that we all have to meet for drinking water labs, and we would be able to implement it immediately. Since all labs are supposed to be in compliance already, it's already included in full in our current regulations. The con is that we already have the Drinking Water Cert Manual requirements.
Where's the mute?
Can someone put their phone on mute, please? So we already have the Drinking Water Cert Manual requirements incorporated into the current standards, and it's the lack of specificity that has led to differing auditor interpretations, which is one of which is one of the major complaints by many of you. And also, the drinking water manual is just not enough for California. We would have to adapt it to be applicable to the other matrices we certify, and that would take time and resources. So what are the pros and cons for ISO 10025? Well, it's an international recognized standard, as I mentioned before. It's vetted. It has a lot of credibility because it's international. But the cons is that it costs money, and it's not designated for environmental laboratories specifically. There's no monitoring component, and it would be very difficult to apply it in true form, and we would likely have to modify it to make it applicable for auditing environmental labs. And it is not California specific. So what are the pros and cons of the ELAP 2003 standard? Well, it's free. It's available online. Everybody can use it. And we could begin implementation period immediately. And there are some compliance resources, although they're outdated. The con for us is that it is outdated, and it's a less flexible version than the updated TNI 2009 standard. So what are the pros and cons of TNI's 2009 standard? Well, the pro is that it has the more flexible technical requirements than the ELAP 2003, and there are a lot of resources available. The con is that we'd have to pay for it. And the lab perspective is that it's more specific than the drinking water manual. What are the pros and cons of creating our own? Well, we could tailor it to California's needs, but then the con is that it would be a long process. Actually, let me go back to the pros. When I say tailor California's needs, I want to identify like the specific technical issues in California, like perchlorate and Chrome 6. So the cons would be, this would take long for us to do for the entire program. It would take an immense amount of staff time and resources to accomplish. And then we'd have to invest even more time in creating our own training program for our assessors. In addition, training, outreach, and education for labs on the content of what we have created on our own. This could result in what we're calling the island effect. The things I know most of you on the phone don't really care about, but California could end up like this island, all on our own. And it would limit our ability to draw on resources from other states and limit our ability for laboratories to do work in other states. In addition, other states won't recognize our certificates. There could be the potential. It is not one of the top priorities, but we do see it as a valid concern. So, let's open it up for discussion on the options we've identified for technical standards. We're going to open the phone lines. If you wish, you can identify yourself before your question or comment. And then, if you want to speak, just unmute your phone.
This is Debbie Webster from the Central Valley Clean Water Association. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure I'm in. Okay. I think one of the concerns that we have, and one of the very big concerns that we have is with the current, with a lot of our permits, we like where you saw the adapted for I want to say Oregon, have to have to comply with also CFR 136, so that becomes a really important part. But I think
we are in. They are not, we are 76. Wow.
Mute your phones, please. You're disrupting the webinar. Okay.
And so, yeah, okay, so anyways, but what I think, the concern that we continue to have with this is that some of the other standards that have been put forth really are not adaptable in a economic and viable way for small POTWs in their laboratories. And so for us, I think that really one of the big cons that we see with these other methods is that they're going to be too expensive and they'll jeopardize our ability to comply with our permit in a viable way.
Great. We want to know all of that. Thank you. Thank you,
Christine, David Kimbrough, Pasadena Water and Power.
Hi, David.
Hi. Well, you gave us a lot to start off on. I would take a different approach in that I don't think any of these are accreditation standards. Your regulations are accreditation standards. That's what you enforce. And I don't think California uses the Lab Certification Manual by US EPA even for drinking water accreditation. It's not cited in regulation. And aside from that, I think the real core of the accreditation isn't any of those things. It's the methods. When an auditor comes out, they don't go to ISO or any of those things. They come out and look at what methods you're accredited for. If you're accredited for 200.7, you're either accredited for 200.7 or you're not. So it seems to me we've got to keep focus on that. The accreditation standard is California's regulations, and that the core of it is actually applying the methods that we're accredited for.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you, David. Does anyone have any other comments about that first module? So I do want to mention that with respect to each of the options, there are technical differences. So I want to point that out, is that is what we're looking at. Drinking water cert manual versus T&I requirements, technical requirements in it. But thank you for that comment. Anybody else? Did we cover all of the pros and cons of, did we miss anything? Because remember, we're here to communicate the information, empower you so that we have the appropriate discussion at the LTAC meeting, future LTAC.
Christine, this is Mindy.
Hi, Mindy?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to point out, I noticed that you had it's a con listed for a few of the options, but it's not California specific, and yet you left that one off of being a con on the TNI 2009 option. So I didn't understand that. And then also when you were presenting,
thank you.
Also, when you were presenting which states were doing it, you have Virginia listed as that they're TNI 2009. But Virginia, if I understand it, actually has a dual accreditation program where they do 2009 for, commercial labs, but they have their own created, toned-down version of it for municipal labs or non-commercial labs. So I don't know if that really is a fair assessment to show that that's just a TNI lab.
So that's really good information, Mindy. so much.
Well, it's Verizon
He
carries
put your phone on mute.
for the company.
So one thing I just want to note, the expert review panel said that we shouldn't have a dual program, and they don't recommend that. I just want to note that, the recommendation. But yeah, maybe, you know, we didn't identify Virginia correctly, and so we will look into that. We can discuss that at the future LTAC meeting.
Christine, this is Debbie Webster. I'm sorry. And Mindy, did you finish?
Yes, I'm done.
Oh, okay. So, Christine, one of the things that we've been talking about within our membership is the ability to do something more individual to address some of the needs of our communities in California and the Central Valley. But then being able to give a reciprocity type of certification for those labs that also have the ELAP standards or these other standards. And so there might be a way of still having California standards, but not having not necessarily having a dual system, but allowing that reciprocity to occur.
Yeah, we will take that into account. So that's just added information on how reciprocity can be, like, revamped.
Hi, Christine. This is Josie.
I just.
Inasmuch as, you know, I understand that, the ERP did recommend one system for all, one standard for all. Actually, one standard for all.
Yes.
We're gonna note it, but at the same time, I think we should also consider it to note that those states that you outlined earlier may have also dual system. If Virginia, as presented, only list them as one standard, but reality is they have dual system, perhaps going back to the drawing board and see if any of those states have similar situations. That they have provision between commercial and non-commercial entity. I think that would be a good factor to bring forth with this evaluation.
Okay, thanks, Josie. That is good information, and we know it could be an option. We know that some states, audit laboratories for the drinking water manual, just for the drinking water labs, and then they create their own standard or use another standard to audit to the other matrices. Any other questions or question topics? Anything that
Christine, hi, this is Renee.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, I was just curious, and maybe I just don't have quite clear with the different standards, but how does this affect carrying out, the requirements for SW 846, Safe Drinking Water Act, and Clean Water Act? Those analyses remain consistent. I'm just a little concerned about the different aspects of municipal labs versus private sector labs and what all this means. And maybe it's too early into this.
Well, if you remember the slide I mentioned, that it would be a con if we just certified to the drinking water manual because it's just drinking water methods. So your concern is the other world and other matrices that we certify for our regulatory partners and their regulatory purpose. So we would have to take that into consideration because that is our charge. So that's something we have to talk about at LTAC to consider as a con.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Christine. I just was curious. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is Dan Jackson from the city of Benicia. I have two comments. The first one is on states that have their own standards, or perhaps like Virginia that have a sort of dual system. Have you looked at whether or not it would be possible? I mean, one of the cons for California developing its own system is the amount of time that would take. But if we could borrow from the work of one of the other states, perhaps that process of adopting our own standards would not be so onerous we could base it on one of the other states that's already gone through that process. My second question is, have you considered, there was nothing in the presentation about ability or the strain or the resources required by ELAP to implement these standards. Jerry Parr said in the webinar in Rancho Cordova that his auditors spend the first day just looking at the quality management system, and then additional day or days are spent looking at the actual details of how the methods are implemented. That would mean really doubling the amount of time every ELAP audit takes if you're going to go through that kind of process. And so have you considered how much work it's going to be for ELAP to adopt one of these standards, and what resources are going to be needed to implement that kind of very paperwork-intensive type system in terms of auditing it and assessing it?
Okay, thank you for those two comments. So the first comment was, have we looked into other states as a model for state-created? And if we could use that to reduce our time. Well, it's an option, right? And if, we decide on that, we will probably definitely use that as an efficiency tool. But we're not there. We're just looking at the options. But that is a good suggestion, if that's the option that we choose. As far as your second question, I want to just make sure everybody knows these are technical standards. So what you talked about was quality management system, and we will go into that in the second question, decision that we have to make, and we have a pros and cons of that. So if you just hold on tight, we'll get to that.
Christine, I'm sorry, this is Debbie Webster. One more time.
Stephen Clark.
Hi, Stephen. And then we'll take that person that was speaking. Hi, Stephen. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's a quick question. And I think it's just terms you're using, but just for procedural understanding, my understanding was that the recommendation from the expert advisory panel, and whatever recommendation from the LTAC, input you get from other parties, et cetera, and from your own staff would then be compiled, and a recommendation would be made to the board members in terms of how to proceed in California. And yet a couple times so far today you said that the method we choose. So can you clarify the procedures, just the process? Am I correct on the process, that there will be a recommendation to the state board?
Yes.
Or are you guys actually choosing one protocol to submit to the board?
So you are correct. And that we have a slide at the end that talks about next steps, and we will make a recommendation to the board, but we do have several groups that we are going to consult, LTAC, state agency partners, up the executive chain, but we talk about that at the last slide, but yes, that is what we will do, and that's correct. Okay, who has the next question or comment?
So, Christine, I'm sorry, this is Debbie again. You've actually kind of confused me a little bit. Is when you said about the methods versus the standards, obviously California has been using, we've been using, at least in our wastewater, the different methods, but you're saying that those have been certified under California drinking water standards, and I'm wondering, with ELAP's existing accreditation program, was that just wholesale adopted in there, or were there other provisions that have added so that we actually are this with a mix ourselves?
Yes, we have. And our auditors now, we certify labs to the Drinking Water Certification Manual. And in the 90s, we developed the regs from the Drinking Water Manual. Does that answer your question?
So in the 90s, we did it through the manual, and now we're using the Drinking Water Manual. We're using something different right now. Is that correct?
So the Drinking Water Cert Manual is the foundation of all drinking water standards for any lab accreditation program, and we built upon that and wrote our regulations off of that. So we are implementing it. We have to. We get audited by it every couple of years. Whenever it's required for primacy, so we use it.
Christine, is there in regulation or some other document that states that ELAP is basing its auditing on using a standard of the EPA Drinking Water Certification Manual?
So, here's the logic here. We are required, the state of California, for primacy for the drinking water program is to have an accreditation program. And so you are required to audit Laboratories Drinking Water Certification Manual. That's a requirement in primacy for the state of California. So yes, we are auditing labs to the Drinking Water Certification Manual. Did that answer your question?
No, because I've been audited several times by ELAP, and that was one of several sources that was used for specific method requirements along with standard methods, the EPA, MUR, and other specific methods.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what is the special place of the EPA Drinking Water Manual? And is that in ELAP's regulations anywhere, or any other kind of documentation that states that is ELAP's accreditation?
I'm in a meeting with you.
So I think a lot of you are confused because you're not an accreditation program. We don't go and we don't show you, here's the manual that you're accredited to. You're certified for a method, and we look at your SOPs, but the whole basis of our program, if you're a drinking water lab, is based on U.S. EPA's Drinking Water Certification Manual to certify your lab.
Is that documented somewhere?
It's in the regulations. We can call out the statute, but it's there.
Is it in federal regulation or state regulation?
Yes, federal code. So I think we can move on.
Wait, Christine, can you one more clarification? So if it's in federal code, it's what you have to use to be certified. How does that interact with these other certifications types that you're looking at?
So it's really the basis. If you're a drinking water state and you certify labs for drinking water, it's the basis for all accreditation programs. I think what I'll do is I'll clarify the connection to ELAP and all other states and the nexus to the Drinking Water Certification Manual on our webpage, but it is a requirement. ELAP is audited every 2 years by US EPA on the Drinking Water Certification Manual, and other states are. Each US EPA region does it. It's a minimum requirement for states that they built on it for their regulations if you are certifying drinking water labs. So I think this is just information about the basics of our accreditation program, and I understand there's confusion, but I think we should move on.
Christine, can I have one more question about this though, with the pros and cons?
Sure.
So with TNI 2009, we have it listed up there that there are other states that have modified it. Jerry Parr in the Rancho Cordova webinar or seminar said very clearly it's all or nothing. ERP has recommended go with it, but only do one PT, which doesn't seem as a how is this a viable option to modify if Jerry Parr is saying it's all or nothing, or I guess I'm just confused on that point.
So it is.
This is Jerry.
Let me just clarify something. If you pay for a copyrighted standard, you could use any of the language, mix and match, pick and choose any module that you want. But you got to pay for it all to have it. So that is clarifying my understanding of what it would take for us to adopt that standard.
Christine, can I jump in? This is Jerry.
Hi, Jerry.
Yeah, when I was saying all or nothing, I wasn't really talking about the PT module. That's in Module 1. The Rancho Cordova workshop was all focused on the Quality System Standard, Module 2. So we were only talking about one part, not the entire standard. So you have the flexibility to adopt the TNI Quality System module and not the PT module.
Okay, but if we adopt any one module, then it's every bulletin in that module has to be...
Because otherwise you're going to get into playing with the language, and that's just a really dangerous path to walk down.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Okay, well, any more questions? But, you know, it's apparent that, you know, there's a knowledge gap about what our requirements are as a lab accreditation program in California, what the primacy requirements for the Division of Drinking Water is and how we relate to them. So we will do outreach and try and close that knowledge gap. If no one has any more comments or discussion.
With David Kimbrough here with Water and Power. I'll just say I disagree with your assessment about the TNI. You were saying it's clearer, more precise. I think it's less so. I think Chris Gunning's presentation showed up lots of ambiguities, lots of vagueness, and lots of even contradictions. So I would disagree with how you're characterizing that. You know, that the current system of accreditation is less clear than this potential alternative. I would say the reverse is true.
So thank you, David. We will note that, and we can talk about that at our LTAC meeting.
Hi, Christine. This is Misty Mercier.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question about Arizona. It was pointed out that they created their own standard and they did something completely different, it sounds like, from the rest of the country. Has that been evaluated for whether or not they're experiencing an island effect or major unique cons because they are all by themselves?
Hi, thank you for that comment. And question. So we heard from Steve Baker, who is the program manager from Arizona, and he did state that during the ERP meeting.
I'm sorry, I wasn't at that meeting. Could you just quickly recap for me?
So let me pull from the vault of my memory base here. So if I remember, they emphasized on data. They built the program from scratch on their own. Let me remember. Their audits, I think, are dependent on their data review package. You know, I didn't anticipate a question about Arizona. I apologize.
That's okay. I'm sure it's on the website somewhere. I'll look into it.
You know, it's not. It's not, because it was a verbal presentation. There was no PowerPoint. But you know what? I'm happy to somehow talk to Steve, have him put something together, see if he can give us information on his program, something that I feel comfortable giving you that's from him, not from me relaying his information. And we'll send you a summary. Okay. Sounds like we can move on. Okay, decision 2. So as I said, we're going to go through the structure where we tell you some decisions we have to make, and then tell you our research, and then tell you the pros and cons of the options that we garnered from the research. So decision 2 was, should we add a quality management system? So if we do, what should we use, and what are our implementation options. So what do other states do? So 21 of the states use the Drinking Water Cert Manual, and it doesn't have none of them require quality management system, that term. 11 states that created their own standards, 7 of those have quality management system elements, and 4 of the states have no quality management system language. ISO, there are 2 states that use ISO, and it requires quality management system. The ELAP 2003 standards, there are 2 states. It requires quality management system, and TNI, 13 states. The TNI accrediting bodies, they all require quality management systems. So that's the universe of the states that require that. So I wanted to give you a little bit more detail about the state-created states that have quality management systems in it. We talked to Kentucky, and they use ISO as the foundation for their quality management system. You heard from Wisconsin at the expert review panel report, and they use TNI, ELAP as the foundation for their language for quality management systems. And 5 states, Connecticut, North Carolina, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and Washington created their own with quality management systems. So, what do we see as the pros of including laboratory quality management system into the ELAP universe? So the pros, it would allow us to evaluate more than just one day we're there in a laboratory. It's more than just the snapshot of the lab. I mean, we have seen during our audits that some laboratories have in the system. Examples, they get ready, prepared to get their labs audited, get the paperwork all straightened in together. And so it's just a snapshot. If there were quality management systems, there would be required documentation and recording of certain requirements that it would have in the standard. And we feel it would be, we'd do a better job of compliance. There would be more consistent audits, more specificity in requirements, and less subjectivity during assessments. It would enhance the consistency of laboratories during times of turnover because there are standard operating procedures and policies and management rules in place in a laboratory. And then it would allow ELAP to verify capability for non-standard methods. For emerging contaminants that regulatory agencies want us to have a laboratory do some analysis for. An example is recently the Division of Drinking Water is requesting labs to do early monitoring for 123-TCP. And then the state agency partner group has expressed that if a lab had laboratory quality management system, that they would have a higher confidence in the data. And then, the expert panel, who is not a decision body, but we think are a group of pretty smart people, if we go against them, then we would want a really good reason not to go with quality management systems. So that is where we see the pros are. So what are the cons that we put together? And, here's a list that we would have to go back to the expert review panel and tell them, we're going in a different direction that you tell us to. But we want to be transparent and open and give you the knowledge and power to talk to your LTAC representative. So we want to put everything out here so that we make sure we get it right and we analyze the information appropriately. So the cons we see is that change takes effort for all of you. We acknowledge that it would require a good amount of change on all our parts, ELAP and the laboratories. It would cost additional staff and time, resources. We will have to be dedicated to implementation. Implementing new procedures causes disruption for you, for ELAP, and it's time. And there's even some evidence it may lead to lab closures, and I'll elaborate that in a minute. It's not just increased resources to you, it's increased resources to ELAP, more training and auditing time for us and everyone. So there is the Florida case study. You know, when Florida went to TNI, they also made a number of changes to their program, and the evidence suggests that a number of labs closed or were consolidated. So, you know, and there were approximately 90 government labs on this inactive list that Florida has posted. You know, was this because of the new requirements? You know, it's hard to say. We can surmise that is the reason, but we definitely can't say. But I do want to tell you that we'll work and talk to LTAC to pay a lot of attention to the Florida case study. So let's move on to Decision 2A, which is if we include a quality system.
Yeah, I just got a message from one of our clients. For some reason, a report got to them that doesn't belong to them, and I didn't know where you were. Are you anywhere in the LA area? Hi.
Hello, can you please?
Oh, okay. All right.
Let's wait for just a second, everybody.
I didn't want to go out to Century City if I can avoid it. But what I'll do is I'm going to go. I'll be going to Century City.
We're going to go ahead and mute everybody. If everybody could just be on standby for a second. Okay, I think we can continue. So, as part of the Decision 2, there's Decision 2A, which is if we include quality management system, which one? We have options based on our research, and it's ISO 17025, NELAC 2003, TNI's 2009, or create our own. So what do we see as the pros and cons of ISO 17025? Well, it's an internationally recognized standard, as I mentioned before. The cons are it's designed for testing and calibration laboratories. It's not specific to environmental labs, but they do use it. Not many states use it unmodified, and we'd have to pay for it, and it's not California specific. It would be resource intensive for the labs to learn the new standard and for ELAP, to learn the standard, to audit to the standard, to train. So what about NELAC 2003 standard? Well, we see the pros are that it's free. It's online. We can get it right now, and everybody can use it. And we could begin planning to implement the period immediately. And I want to emphasize planning because we would have to still develop the training tools and train the laboratories and ELAP staff. And there are some compliance resources available, but it is outdated, so because the new version is TNI's 2009. The cons, as I said, are outdated, and if you remember, it's less flexible than the updated version, the TNI 2009, and it would also be resource intensive, as I mentioned before, for ELAP and the lab. So what about TNI's 2009? Well, we see the pros as it's more flexible in the technical requirements than the NELAC 2009, and you heard Jerry say that in his workshops when he was in California, and there are resources available to you and to ELAP as a program. There's a lot of tools, templates, there's a forum, there's trainings, so we see that as a pro. The con is, you've heard it, there's a paywall, we'd have to pay for it. And it would also be resource intensive for the other reasons I stated before. And if you recall, there were the Florida job loss case study and lab closure. A last con would be that T&I is not California specific. So the next slide is create your own standard. Well, what do we see as the pros? Well, we would be able to tailor it to California and our state. But the cons are that it would be a long process. You know, if you created your own, we would have to get together with LTAC. We would form subcommittees. We would have to look at every single possible word in the standard. And it's resource intensive, and we'd have to create our own outreach, education, training tool for labs and assessors, and the island effect would possibly come into play. And we wouldn't have state reciprocity. Potential failure for state reciprocity. If you recall, Wisconsin said that they had that island effect as well, and other states didn't accept their certification. So decision 2B, so if we went with a quality management system and one of those options that I just identified, what are our options for implementation? Well, we've come up with 3, and we could do kind of a lot. We could have immediate implementation, we could stagger the implementation, or we can delay the compliance date for implementation. And I'll go over those 3, the pros and cons. So immediate implementation. Well, the state agent partners get what they want because they've expressed that they want quality management system and expressed the higher data confidence from laboratories that have it. The con is that it would not be a sustainable, effective way to just do something right away and not have it meaningful. And honestly, it's off the table. And we're not going to make any of you do anything overnight if we decided on any decision today. So that is, immediate implementation is not a possibility in my perspective. So what's another option? Well, staggered implementation. So we could stagger the dates of compliance of the standard. So the pros would be more time for us to provide training to all of you. Allows us time for meaningful development of lab processes, so you just get more time to develop what is in the requirements for your lab, and it's just less burdensome to your operations. The cons would be that the partners may oppose it. So we could delay the implementation to a later date, far out into time. The pros would be, it would just be even more time for us to provide you training, for you all to learn this new compliance standard, and time for meaningful development for your lab processes to develop the documents. And then the cons would be that the state agency partners may oppose it. I want to go back, though, to the staggered implementation because I missed a point in the pros is, well, an example of the staggered implementation. So you know that quality management systems has records and documentation that they ask you to put together, organizational charts, procedures, and policies. So we could say, do that in 2 years, do that in 1 year, and then maybe a year later you can do your internal audit process. So there's a plethora of dates for staggered implementation for this option. So I just wanted to let you know that we're committed, and you have a commitment from ELAP and from the board, that this is not going to happen overnight, and that if we went with one of those options for quality management system, we would provide implementation assistance. You have the commitment from us. And there is a possibility of researching some financial assistance for all of you, because we've expressed that is a con. And so we're looking into it. And we will look more deeply into it if that decision is made. But I wanted you all to know that I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, we're committed to assisting the lab community. So that is the end of decision 2. So we're going to open up the phone lines, and you can identify yourself if you like.
Okay.
Do you have any comments?
Hi, Christine. This is Kim from Roseville.
Hi.
Hi there. I do have a comment. You said the pros on going to a quality management system would be, a couple of them would be that would be more consistent audits, and you'd have enhanced consistency of lab turnover, and it allows ELAP to verify the capability of non-standards. Why can't you do that now? Why do you have to have a quality management system on our laboratories in order to do that? I believe you can probably do more consistent audits maybe once you've adopted ISO 17011 and train your auditors. I don't understand why putting these layers on the laboratory is going to make it better for us labs and for you, ELAP.
So our current regulations and standards right now, there's a paragraph in section 64815, I believe. And it's just a paragraph. It says you must record, you must do this, you must have a quality assurance plan. But it's so vague that there is not enough specificity in there to know what the auditor should actually be asking for. So it leaves interpretation on what they think is sufficient. We see quality management as being more specific than what we have, but also having some flexibility too, so that you can write your policies and procedures the way you want to. That's the way we see it. But, you know, this is our opinion. We think it's a pro, and we can talk to LTAC and you more on this topic.
Christine, David Kimbrough, Pasadena Water and Power.
Hi, David.
Hi. Hey, well, let me start off by saying that the TNI and the ISO 17025 and all that, these are not quality management systems. They're, at best, part of a quality management system. A true quality management system incorporates the entire system. So that's, you know, statute, regulation, permit writing, monitoring plans. If you had a real quality system, it included all those things. The lab is probably the last part of a true quality management system. And a fairly good model for this is actually the California Air Resources Board. They have a quality system. It's on their webpage. And it starts with statute, it goes through regulation, permitting. They have a quality assurance system in place. And it doesn't just apply to the labs, it applies to the permit writers, and it applies to everybody. So that everybody has the same data quality objectives and the same measurement quality objectives. Because, you know, you can't have a quality system without data quality objectives. And that's what's really missing here. So I'm going to disagree with you on that one. And I'll echo the comment earlier that simply having a quality management system doesn't make for more consistent audits. If that's really training and management, that's having somebody at the top saying, everyone's going to do things the same way. And simply writing documents to say that isn't the same thing as making it happen.
So, David, thank you for those comments. I do just want to mention that the Water Board and the Division of Drinking Water and all the agencies that I've talked to have quality assurance plans for the NPDES permitting, for stormwater. So there is a system in place from my knowledge in the agencies that I've worked with and the partners that we've worked with. So I just want to mention that. But your comments are good, and definitely we will talk about this later, and we'll put that on the table when we discuss this with you all at the LTAC meeting.
Christine?
And again, take those comments if you're not part of LTAC and use it to have the conversation with your representatives.
Christine, hi, this is Renee Spears. Can you hear me?
Hi, Renee.
Hi, I just want to interject that at the state board, we're really committed to a quality system with the focus of a quality system being tiered to the individual program or the goals of the program, projects, and it's not just the state board throughout the state of California and in fact the country. And they do take some time, but once they're implemented, they result in accountability, consistency, and a higher data quality, really. And I think that was probably the point here.
Thank you for that comment, Renee.
Welcome.
Hi, Kristen. This is Josie.
Hi, Josie.
The ERP report, we always go back to the ERP report that if we deviate from their recommendation, that we have to justify why we're deviating it. That is kind of hard for me to understand exactly why. It's not a mandate. It's not a mandate. It's a recommendation, and therefore, for the best interest of ELAP and its stakeholder community, the entire California Laboratories that it accredited, if there is an option outside these three that the ERP report covers, there's nothing stopping us from considering it. For example, 2003 standards we were talking about. There's no reason for us to basically modify it and adapt what's best for everybody. We keep saying it's outdated and there's 2009, but 2009 will be outdated too by end of this year. So I think, if you can provide some clarification on why we have to justify if we do not follow the ERP recommendation, would help me along with folks that are wondering the same thing, why is there such a pressure?
So thank you for those comments, Josie. And, when, I moved over from public health to the water board, and I was appointed the first day that the program came to the board, July 1st in 2014. And as you know, there were a lot of problems and issues, and the board was committed to fixing the program and putting it on the right course. So that was my first task, was to find 5 experts in the field. And the process was very thorough by SWRCB. And they were the experts, and I believe the community vetted them. And so it's their expert opinion, recommendation. So it does carry some weight. But if you remember, there are other bodies that we're going to consult with, the state agency partners, LTAC, you have a lot of LTAC members here, and executive management and the board. So I wouldn't say that, that we have to give good reason. We do have to give good reason why we're going against experts in the field. So that, I hope that answers your question, but it's not the only decision body for us to look at, or excuse me, they're not a decision body, only recommendation that we look at for our decisions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it sounds like with the silence that we can move on to the next decision that ELAP is looking at. So how frequent do we require proficiency testing? So What are the other states do? Well, 17 states require 2 per year, and all the rest are 1. Historically, some states have required 4 per year. PTs is the opportunity for us to monitor labs, to send those blind samples, to ensure that you know how to detect whatever is in there, and you know, it gives us some confidence. So what do we see as the pros and cons of 1 time per year? Well, we're already doing this, so there wouldn't be any change. You know, it's 1 time per year, so there's less opportunity to monitor. That's really it for 1. 2, well, the pros are just more opportunity, and the cons would be additional to the laboratories, more time and money for the samples. And we understand that running those PTs are a disruption to your day-to-day lab processes, and it's resource intensive, right, to administer them. What are the pros and cons for 3 times per year? So historically, as I mentioned, some labs have done that in the past. I don't know if any do now, but again, even more opportunity for monitoring. The con would be we don't have the resources to do that. We have a PT unit, and we are reviewing the annual PTs every year. And then the con would be it's more cost to your laboratories. So this one was pretty short, and we're just going to open that up for discussion. We brought this one up because it is in the TNI and the ELAP 2003 standard for PTs. But if you remember, if you purchase it, you can choose which modules you want to implement. PT is 1 module.
Christine, I think one of the things that you missed on there is that anytime you increase the time that you do this, you're not only going to increase the lab cost, but you're going to increase the program cost overall. Mm-hmm. Because it'll take more time on the state board's part too.
Thank you for that comment, but I think we mentioned it, but it probably wasn't mentioned clearly. But yeah, increase the cost of ELAP time to review process. Thank you.
Christine, David Kimbrough, Pasadena Water and Power. Well, I'd like to look at this question from the other end. The ERP was created because the state board was concerned that, that the old ELAP program under previous management had not been doing their job, and they were anxious to get recommendations on how ELAP can improve its work. And let me say, we're all very thankful that ELAP's been suffering from non-benign neglect for decades, and it's good to see the state board taking an active effort in this. And with that said, I don't see what changing from 1 to 2, what problem that solves. No one's ever said that ELAP's problem was that it wasn't requiring enough PT samples. The problem is they weren't reviewing the PT samples that were already being analyzed once a year. And so the idea to double the number of PT samples per year is a solution, but it doesn't identify the problem. There's no problem with not enough PTs. So it just seems to be an arbitrary number that that gets thrown out that isn't addressed as solving any particular problem.
Okay, thank you, David. And ELAP, we are processing the 1 annual a year, and we recognize that it would take more resources. So that's a good comment. And we can talk about it. That's one decision we have to make about the frequency of PTs.
Hi, Christine. This is Chelsea again. My question is there a problem now with 1 PT a year?
No, I don't see a problem with 1 PT a year for California.
Thank you.
Do any of you see a problem with one?
No.
I think this is a good conversation because then we can come to some sort of decision at LTAC, and you can all comment to ELAP and let us know that more than one doesn't make any sense.
No.
Christine, hi, Renee. Here's. Hi, I just wanted to comment that the one proficiency testing here also lines up with the DMR QA that the NPDES permitted facilities have to participate in, and they can in California use the proficiency testing results from their laboratories to submit as compliance with the DMR QA studies.
That's a really good point to mention, Renee, that there's dual purpose for RPTs that can apply to your DMR QA program.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like no one has any more comments about PTs. So I think we're going to take this one to the finish line here. So our next steps are that we're going to use LTAC to help guide our decisions. And we're planning multiple LTAC meetings. The next one is May 11th. And we're also getting input from our state agency partner groups. We meet with them regularly as well. We're going to make a recommendation to the board in September. And then we anticipate a board decision by December 2016. So this is my last slide. So do we have the adequate information? You know, we originally discussed having 3 webinars, 2 hours each. And if you all remember the email blast I sent to everyone, you know, we consolidated them because of time and resource constraints. But, you know, we've found that by condensing them, it made for a more cohesive presentation. So did we achieve this, or do we need additional webinars or more information to help you with information to communicate with your LTAC members and for the LTAC members on the phone so that we can have a productive meeting on the 11th and subsequent meeting afterwards? So we're going to open the line for any comments or questions.
Christine, this is Josie. Where does the stakeholder input, participation, comment period, or suggestion come to play? Outside of LTAC, outside of LTAC period. You know, I think I mentioned this to you before in some of the meetings that some decision making that requires regulatory changes and whatnot, it goes through public process. Where does that fit into all of this?
So they're the other body that we must, consult with. Our law, the Environmental Lab Accreditation Act, states that, we certify labs for regulatory purpose, and they're the regulatory agency partners. So we had a meeting a couple months ago. We are scheduling a meeting like every couple months to just touch base with them, to let them know, where we're at in our work plan, where we are with respect to the recommendations, what LTAC is saying, and then they give us their recommendation. That in our last meeting is where they told us about data confidence in quality systems in a laboratory. So, I hope I answered that question, but they're an important group. They're as important as LTAC, as important as any of your comments that you have that you send to us, but we do talk to them regularly.
Okay. So Christine, I have a question also for you, or a comment. You said that, on these outreach hasn't been enough. And I think the two that you really cut out were the other two besides T&I that you were standards that you were looking at, and I was actually looking forward to finding out more about those, and this didn't do that. So are you planning on covering that, or are you just looking at one standard now? Is that?
So what specifically do you want to know? And then if we get enough interest, you know, we will put the information out there. We might talk to LTAC to see if it's additional information that the community needs, but I'd like to know the specifics.
In the sense of, so you were looking at the ISO standards. How would they entail? How would they? I think how would they potentially impact the laboratory? That's what I'm looking. That's what I was looking for. And I think with the T&I workshop, that helped. That with not having the material, but that really helped answer some of those questions for us, and to be able to say, okay, so if we applied this to our laboratories, what would that mean?
Yeah, and you know what? Unfortunately, can't answer that question until we know that that's the decision we're going to make. But in the workshops, we went through the standards line by line. They walked through it with you. If we need another webinar, we can try and do that. But we just don't know what would be what we would require from if we chose ISO, what we would require if we chose T&I. That is just something we can't tell you. But if we do, remember that implementation, there's so many ways to implement a new standard, a new requirement.
Christine, David Kimbrough. I know I'm sort of struggling with the reason the reason that there were originally 3 webinars proposed was because the ERP sort of had 3 options. And it seems like here we have way more than 3 options.
Yeah, we looked at it as broad options. I mean, we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves in just 3 options that the ERP tells us. We're looking at it from different angles, and we're looking at it, as I said in the structure of this presentation, decisions that we have to make about the program. And the laboratory standard that we choose will impact those decisions. So I think let's go back to those decisions. Maybe we need to make other decisions, but let's talk about that. Tell us what we're missing. Remember, what have we not discussed? Did we not get the information?
Okay. The last question I posed in terms of PT, I would then pose in terms of these other requirements as well. 17025, NELAC 2003, and TLAC 2009, NELAC 2016. What problem are we solving? What problem that ELAP had before, under the old management, that those things would have solved? And I raised this last year at this seminar, and I'll raise it again. It doesn't seem to me that that these are, again, solutions in search of problems. That the problems that ELAP had were management decisions. The people were not, there was no leadership. People were not requiring auditors, assessors to be uniform, to be consistent. And that simply adding a bunch of extra requirements doesn't address those problems. And so it seems to me we got it backwards. We're not saying, well, what were the problems that ELAP was facing, and what kind of new standards do we need that would solve those problems? It's just sort of, well, here's a bunch of options that are sort of randomly arranged, and we sort of like pick among them, rather than trying to work backwards from solving a specific problem. So that's my comment.
Thank you for that comment. Maybe a decision, would then be to ask, how do you fix a problem? So remember, this is to just inform you of our research, what options we've garnered from the research, and then we will talk about it with the community and LTAC at future meetings. So think about those things.
Christine, this is Mindy. I guess one thing that I really was hoping for here that I guess I'm disappointed that we don't have is more investigation or research. I mean, it's been a couple of months that we were, looking at what these options were going to be and knowing that we were going to do a presentation, and yet, looking into the fact that Virginia is listed up there just as T&I, but, how in-depth were they looked at to see that, yes, they have a dual program and there is another option. And some of the state-specific developed standards, how closely were those looked at to where, and presented to say that, what, we can modify their state standard to be California-specific with only a few quick, easy modifications. It seems like that's what I was looking for to really be able to present option 1 or option 2, in that modify an existing standard. And it doesn't have to just be T&I. It could be one of these other state ones. But when we're just told, oh, they have one, it doesn't give us anything to go off of to see what would it take to make that on our own. I mean, because really coming up with a state-specific one doesn't have to be that hard if there's other states that have ones that are pretty close to what we're looking for in California.
Agreed.
So thank you for that comment, Mindy. And, again, I go back to the time and resource constraints. We did do research. If you want additional information, we can provide that to you. So I think make the request, and we can talk about it at LTAC, and then we can have more conversation on it.
Okay.
Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Can you hear me? This is Tony Ferrandini.
Hi, Tony.
City of Vacaville. Hi. Hey, speaking to time and resources, I guess someone must have put us on hold because I hear music in the background. That doesn't mean this is ending. Anyway, when you talk about time and resources, it's like that any decision that is made that's going to affect that's going to require new regulations to enforce is going to be taking time and resources. And so it seems to me that that one of the options that's left off the table here is consideration of the new 2016 T&I standard and how it relates to the 2009 standard if we're going to go in that direction. It would be good to maybe have an evaluation of what is in the 2016 standard that should be out shortly. And since this is not going to be something that's going to be adopted this year, it's going to take probably a few years to get this in place. We should probably go with the latest standard if we're going with T&I. That's my 2 cents.
So I apologize, everybody, for that music. So that is the problem with Global Meet that we have here in the state and all other agencies use it, so I apologize. So Tony, you had a good comment that, what about 2016? Well, we didn't look at that. So we can, if that's information that you all need, that you want to be informed on, we can look at it. But we didn't look at 2016 because it's not out yet, and that's a good comment.
This is Dan Jackson with the City of Benicia. I want to go back to the issue of the other states, because I think the ERP, while they gave 3 options, it was really clear they preferred T&I, and given their backgrounds and their connections with T&I, that's not a surprise. So you could say there's certainly some momentum in that direction. But if you look down that road, you can see that if California adopted T&I as the accreditation standard, there would be a tremendous amount of work involved, both on the part of ELAP and on the part of the laboratories, a tremendous investment of resources, primarily in the creation of documentation, and the probable closure of many small municipal labs that provide valuable and irreplaceable services to their agencies, as was recognized by Felicia Marcos at one of the board hearings. She understood why agencies want to have their own labs. So when you look ahead to all those potential negative consequences for adopting T&I as a standard, I think it really programs and see whether or not we could save our a lot of time and pain by
I apologize, everybody.
it goes before the board without thoroughly vetting some of the other possibilities that are opened by the other state programs, then I think it will be a real disservice to the California community.
So I didn't catch the last part of what you said, but what I think you were saying is that that you want more information and research, and so.
Well, the point I'm making is I think that LTAC should ask for this and perhaps even help with it. But I think some more detailed, like the fact that you're unaware of Virginia's developments of its own method-based standards, shows that the research should go deeper into some of the and that Virginia is not just simply a TNI state, shows that the research could be done, excuse me, a little deeper. And I think that having some specific information about the other state programs would be very helpful.
Okay, I like that comment, and I think that's a request that, we'll take into consideration. Again, I just go back to time and resource constraints, and if it's additional information you need to help us make our decision so that we can vet all options and look at other state standards, then we will do that.
Christine, this is Jerry. Can I add something?
Hi.
Hi. And I think this, again, you would have to dig a little deeper. It's my understanding, and this is knowledge, it's about 5 years old when Virginia started their program. The only difference between their two programs is a relaxation of the educational requirement for the technical manager. Their lower tier standard, if you will, is still the TNI standard. It's still a quality system standard. It is not a method standard. But they would just relax the educational requirements for the technical manager. The TNI standard requires so many hours of chemistry or microbiology or something, and they just reduced that a little bit. And I believe that's the only difference that you could call Kathy Westerman at Virginia and find out.
Thank you, Jerry.
Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Hi, this is Cynthia at Long Beach Water.
Hi.
I came in a little bit late, and sorry for that, but I had problems getting on. I know you keep saying that implementation is not something you want to discuss, but can you at least think about that going forward? Because this is a critical part for small labs, how it's implemented, and the decision you make will make a big difference in the implementation. So can I just put it on the board that you consider that in the decision making? And also, what is it that we as small labs can do to influence you?
Yeah. So, thank you for your comment. And we did talk about implementation. We had a couple options that it would be something that we know that we could do overnight or immediately, but that's not on the table. We also talked about staggering and delaying compliance dates. So we are thinking about implementation, and we do recognize the impact it has to all labs, small and large. And the way that you can influence our decision is send us letters and also talk to your LTAC representatives, because we have that forum and meet with them regularly. Our next meeting is May 11th. We have this on the agenda, and let them know your thoughts.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, Christine. This is Kim again.
Christine, this is Stephen Clark with Pacific EcoRisk.
Hi, Steve. Can I get Kim and then you?
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Quick question. Could you please put, or is there some way you can put on your website, a list of small municipal labs that have a quality management system and what it took for them to adopt that quality management system and what the cost was? So, I think that a lot of us out here that have small labs are a little nervous as to what the time and resources it's going to take. And if we could maybe call someone up that's already gone down that road, it would help us out quite a bit. Thanks.
And we need to define what is a small lab, though, because that's a big question.
You're right. Thanks, Minnie. A small lab being less than 5 people.
That's your definition. There's a lot of different definitions, and, just from a research standpoint, that's a lot. I mean, we've done research, but you're talking about all the TNI states, all of ones that use quality systems. Remember the slide that we talked about what states have quality management systems in them and what the origin was, whether or not it was. I mean, that's a lot of information. If we can find it somewhere, we will. I think the suggestion would be to tell your LTAC representatives, and we can ask if that's a request that they have of us. But from the resource standpoint, that's a lot of.
How about Christine? I'm sorry, I need to interject. Jerry Parr is present in this webinar and has been selling to us that TNI has covered all the bases, including small laboratories. If this is a fact, he should have a list of those TNI, those small laboratories that have quality management system through TNI.
You know what? I don't want to put anybody on the spot in this webinar. I think it's a better, more diplomatic way to do this is that I hear your request. We'll talk about it at LTAC. It could be something that we use our time and resources towards. I'm just saying that that's a lot of research to do. I mean, we would have to ask each municipal lab from each state that has quality management systems what the costs were. So that is all I'm saying here. If it's something that you all want, let's talk about it at LTAC.
Okay, thank you. Because the reason I bring the question up is that the majority of the labs in the state of California, I believe, are small municipal labs, and I would think you all would go over that and see how it's going to impact us.
Yes, and I recognize that. We have 700 labs, 80% are smaller labs, whatever the definition half are municipal. And if you remember the slides, we have the cons on there. But remember, we have to make these decisions first. If it's more information you need for us to make the decisions and get the advice from LTAC, then we can get that information. But let's talk about this. And remember, this slide up here says, do we need additional information or webinars? And that could be the topic.
Thank you.
Christine, is the webinar presentation will be available in your website as well?
Yes.
If so, I was taking notes while you were doing presentation, and there is some information you mentioned in one of the slides, but did not make it to the slides. For example, decision 2A, if we include quality management system, which option? And under TNI, there's only like 1 or 2 cons listed, but you mentioned at least 2 that's not included. And I think through this conversation, there's at least 1 or 2 that was mentioned. So I think we should, if I could make a request to include them as well.
Yes, so if you could just send an email to me or ELAP California on your comments on that slide.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Christine?
Hey, Josie, this is Stephen Clark with Pacific Eco Risk.
Yes. Hi, Stephen.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean Josie. I meant Christine.
Hi, Stephen.
So sorry. Yeah, good. So this is just more of a statement more than anything. Your encouragement of parties to reach out to their LTAC members is working quite well. I've received quite a few direct communications and people chatting with me about their questions and concerns. One of the elements, I believe it was Jerry indicated that Virginia, one of the things, potentially the only thing that they changed in their municipal lab requirements was to reduce a training requirement for the technical directors. One of the items, a couple of the items I'm hearing from folks that are from the municipal lab community is that they have some other challenges with some of the elements and modules, at least in California they do, with some of the TNI standard due to staff constraints, dealing with parties under the ethics training and potential termination of jobs with unions. They have some challenges with some of the management review elements because of the lack of flexibility that they would have, some contractual and some contracting requirements. And I know there's been some indications that just simply cite C municipal code such and such, but that's definitely an underpinning of a variety of communications that have been directed to me by parties to make sure it's conveyed at the LTAC, and so I just figured I'd share that today.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. I'm really happy that the whole idea of LTAC and being a representative and folks from the community are reaching out to you. I'm happy that it's a success. But yeah, let's talk about Virginia. Sounds like everybody really wants to know about Virginia, so that could be something we look into.
So, Christine, David Kimbrough?
Hello.
No?
Hi.
Oh, hi. I thought you said no. I said, oh. Well, I'd just like to raise a different issue. There's a lot of concern about time and resources, as there should be, and sort of how much time something will take. And I would argue, and I think Tony sort of hit on this earlier, is there's not as big a difference in time as it might seem. All of this has to go through the regular, normal rulemaking process.
Correct.
That's going to take time. That's whether we do T&I, all of T&I, part of T&I, something else completely different. And the whole regulatory package is an involved process. So I don't think at the end of the day you're actually talking about a whole lot of differences in terms of, time from your end in terms of preparation of these things. And let me add, ELAP's has historically been, underperforming for, quite frankly, decades. I would rather see ELAP get their standards prepared right rather than have them prepared quickly. And that's kind of how ELAP ended up where it is. They were trying to build their car while they were driving it. They wrote the regulations quickly and, almost immediately realized they had problems. But then since they were already trying to implement things, they never got around to fixing them. So from my point of view, and having seen this, decades ago, I think it's more important to get it right than to get it done quickly.
And I agree. I think we all agree. Those were good comments. Thank you. So, I think...
Actually, Christine, I've got a few more comments or a couple questions and a question. And I apologize because I was in the no-cell zone, so you might have covered this a little bit more. But I think in your second part you said that there was, when you were ending it, that you guys were committed to assistance. Was this assistance only in training, or was the assistance actually more than that? I mean, what level was your commitment?
I think at the highest level, and the Drinking Water Division has already made a large statement, a huge statement, in using its set-aside funds to help train our staff for a multi-year contract for $1.5 million for us to enter into the public bidding process. So the board in general is committed. So training, financial assistance, potentially, possibility, but we won't know what those are until we decide on whichever option we go with and all of those decisions that we make. But I wanted to put that slide up there to let you know that from my position on up, we are committed.
Okay, but that wouldn't necessarily, if there was additional personnel that was required to implement a method, that wouldn't necessarily cover those costs, would it? Or are you saying that those are in the assistance possibilities?
Well, I can't say specifically for labs. So what I can tell you from my past job in the stormwater program and wastewater and PDS is that there's grants and there's all kinds of financial assistance that the water board provides. and there should be no difference in any other program that the Water Board administers. So
yeah.
If that's something, I said financial assistance. We've already stated loud and clear that the board in general, that they are going to put money towards this program to help fix it. They hired the expert panels. We had that contract in place. So I think that their message to you all is that we are committed to helping, and financial assistance is a possibility. But we won't know what that's going to look like until these decisions are made.
Okay, and then the second thing, and this is actually more out of the T&I workshop, but it goes towards kind of the pluses and minuses. A high recommendation I would ask for you to actually take to your legal counsel would be to take those T&I standards and say, hey, if you require, based upon the language that is in them, if you required this, would those little notes that were supposed to give flexibility, would you even be able to implement them? Because in enforcement, just as we are familiar with more in the permit compliance enforcement, those things in basin plan implementation really have there's not, unless the language is specific above, this really cannot be considered. So I'd really recommend that you get a finding one way or the other from your legal staff on the enforceability or the ability to really implement those.
So that's a good comment. In everything that we do, we always consult. We have two attorneys. We have an administration attorney and an enforcement attorney. And if it comes to us using TNI and we would reference it and adopt it in our regulations, we'll definitely ask if the notes are something that is enforceable. That's your question, right? Or your comment?
Yeah, but I would say you need to do that before you figure out if the T9 is the way that you want to go. I mean, that needs to be a consideration above, because if you're at the workshop, it was like, oh no, it doesn't make a difference because you can do the notes. But in reading those notes and reading the way that it was written in there, it really seems like if you would put that into a permit or into a basin plan, those would be to no effect.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have any more comments?
Kristen, there's a question that somebody sent to me via email. Are you folks that don't have the ability to join us via phone, submit questions to the Q&A? Are you folks responding to that as well?
I don't know what you mean, Josie. What?
It's the Q&A portion of your go-to meeting. Folks are submitting questions to that as well.
We are checking right now. You can just hold tight. No, there are no questions online.
All right, thanks. I'll let them know. Thanks.
Yeah. You can talk.
Okay, I think if there are no comments, we can close this webinar. I really thank all of you for attending and listening in. If you have any more comments, you can email them to ELAP California. We have a couple to-do items that we're going to get. We have some knowledge gaps about the certification manual and our accreditation requirements, and we've been taking notes, and it's going to be recorded and posted to our webpage. So talk to your LTAC members. Remember the goal is to empower you all to talk to your representatives so that we have very productive conversations and ensure that we are considering all the options. And I think that will end the webinar. Thank you.
Yeah. There were 20.